Hi everybody. This video is walking you guys through your third essay assignment. And this essay, we are actually going to switch gears completely. So you are actually going to be applying the ideas of argumentation to analyzing a piece of literature in a literary analysis essay. So you are going to write your analysis over a short story that we read in this unit and develop a written argument around that story using literary elements and narrative elements. So what you're going to do is choose one of the stories that we read in this unit. So make sure that you are writing about a story that we read in this unit. Do not give me an essay that's over a story that we didn't read in this unit. Develop a written and literary analysis of that work. Contextualize that by looking at specific literary terminology that you can integrate into that based on the lectures we've had. So things like characterization, setting, point of view, conflict. Create a thesis claim around one of those major literary foci and include the main ideas and evidence from the text to support your claims. So you have 4 stories you can choose from: Hills Like White Elephants, Yellow Wallpaper, Cask of Amontillado, and Everyday Use. The things I want you to think about as you write this analysis: what's the primary literary element that you want to focus on? So what's the thing that you found most interesting about that story? And which story did you find most interesting? So you write about that story. You could focus again on things like setting or conflict or characterization. Is there a literary theory that you can apply to this analysis? So within this analysis, could you think about how certain theories like Marxist theory or gender theory or new historicism, how do these theories maybe influence your analysis? And then what's the argument that you're trying to make? So when you're doing literary analysis, you're making an argument about the work. You're saying, I think this means this in the story, or I think this represents this in the story, or this is an important aspect of the story because of X, Y, and Z. So while you're focusing on kind of one primary area, you can also think about the other literary elements that help the author achieve that goal in getting whatever that message is across. And then you also want to think about how the author's own background or the historical situation influenced that work. So again, with Hills Like White Elephants, Hemingway himself was an expat living abroad. So how does that perhaps influence the characters that we read about? The same thing with Charlotte Perkins Gilman in The Yellow Wallpaper. She went through the rescue herself. So how does that perhaps influence the messaging that we're getting as the audience? And think about what critiques you can make about the text in a scholarly manner. So critique, again, does not mean necessarily negative, but what are the things that you can say about this with a scholarly lens? So you do need to include at least 2 credible published sources in your work. One has to be from the library database. The other can be of your choosing. You're more than welcome to include more. They have to be cited correctly. Make sure you have a works cited page as well that should have at least 3 entries on it. It should have the text that you're analyzing and at least 2 sources. And when you're utilizing these sources, just like you did with the second essay, you should be pulling in quotes from both the text and your published external sources that talk about the text to help support your claims. So for example, if I'm saying that in Hills Like White Elephants, the railroad tracks are symbolic of a crossroads in this couple's relationship, I might find an academic source that talks about just that. And then I might pull in a quote from that author that backs up what I'm arguing, that supports what my claim and what I'm saying. So that kind of analysis, that kind of support should be integrated throughout your argument. At the same time, you should be pulling in direct quotes from the text that show your audience what you're talking about. So this means that if you tell me, like I said, that the railroad tracks represent a crossroad in the relationships, then I'm going to pull in a quote from Hemingway's story that talks about the railroad tracks specifically. Or in Everyday Use, if I'm going to talk about Dee's characterization and her being let's say a static character, right? I might pull in a quote that shows that she's learned nothing throughout the story, right? There's a quote with the end and when she walks off and the mother, I think, says something specific to that. In the Cask of Amontillado, if I'm going to talk about the conflict being man versus man, I'm going to pull in a quote from the text that shows that. I might say, whatever the first line is, I've suffered 1,000 grievous injuries from Fortunato, or whatever that specific quote was. So that's how you support your claims in a literary analysis essay. So again, make sure you're integrating good, solid evidence throughout your analysis and each of your main ideas to support your claims. So your essay is going to be 3 to 4 pages in length and is due on Sunday, December 8th at 11:59 p.m. Again, MLA formatting required, check for plagiarism, and minimum page length must be met. Your final essay grade will be made up of the outline, which will begin submitted as a separate assignment, and your final draft, which needs to be a Word doc and includes your works cited page. You guys are going to be assessed in making sure you have good close analysis of the work and its major concepts, good evidence to support your claims from both the primary, meaning the text, and the secondary, meaning the research sources. Proper number of sources used, proper use of those sources. So what you cannot do is just list a source on a works cited page, but never actually utilize them in your argument, never cite them in your argument in text, then it's not utilizing that source. Again, proper page length MLA and citations, fully developed essay structure, including a good intro, clear main ideas with analysis and evidence, and a conclusion that restates your thesis claim and your main ideas in new words, and a good organization of all your ideas. There are a lot of different things you could talk about within these different stories, so choose carefully what you want to talk about. Keep your argument nice and narrow and concrete. Don't try to cover too much, because in that case, you're not going to be going into depth in anything. So you can talk about things like characterization. You can look at archetypes, protagonist, antagonist role, major and secondary development. Are they flat, static, round, dynamic? You can look at literary devices, things like similes, metaphors, personifications, irony, flashbacks. You can look at the structure. So you can look at the dramatic arc, the conflict. Again, this is man versus society, man versus self, etc. The point of view. Is it first person? Is it third person, omniscient? Why does that make a difference? You can also look at literary concepts like themes, symbols, motifs, style, allusion, and of course, lastly, look at the historical context. Now, this is not a literary element, but this is something you can certainly look at with the analysis. So things like the author's own biography, like I said, the historical situation, the ethical, social, and moral issues discussed in the text or taking place at that time, so on and so forth. So if you guys have questions on this, let me know, but otherwise, go ahead and move on to the next assignment.